Thank you so much, Ben. Hi, everyone. Good morning. I hope everyone is doing well. It is very cold where I live in New York City. So if you're in a warmer place, lucky you. And if you are in a place like I am, I hope you're staying warm. So let's see. Today we're going to talk together about the Torah portion, Bishalach. It is generally about the Israelites leaving Egypt and crossing the sea. We are going to focus together today on analyzing the way in which God is portrayed in the Song of the Sea, which is sung after the Israelites cross. And I would like to suggest a more complex view than meets the eye in the context of God's qualities and characteristics in the sea. And I will show you some supporting verses and supporting commentaries for that. And hopefully we will have time for your questions at the end as well as in between each section. So I want to put out there, as I do all the time at the beginning of the class, also that if you don't get to share a reflection or a question, you can always email me afterwards. I'm pretty good about getting back to folks within a few days, if that. So I just put my email in the chat, and you are welcome to note that. And it's also on the source sheets. So with that in mind, I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. Let me just adjust a little bit here. Bear with me. Okay, I'm going to adjust my screen. Okay, and the downside, of course, of not, of sharing your screen is I can't see all of you at one time. So I will be pausing between sections so that I can see you again, all of you, and elicit your reflections and questions. Okay, so we are going to read together not the whole Song of the Sea in Exodus 15, Shemot Tet Vav, but we are going to read a few verses. You can see already that I put a few verses in blue. Those are my favorite ones. And they also, I think, express something interesting about God. And I noted here, whenever it's very difficult to talk and teach about God without being anthropomorphic, it's almost impossible, meaning we always talk about God with human qualities, but I want to put us in the mindset, really challenge us. I'm challenging myself also as we speak about God to really think as abstractly as possible about what we're talking about, which is, it's quite difficult. But nevertheless, I'm going to read aloud the first maybe 5 or 6 verses and then show you a couple verses at the end. And again, this is the Song of the Sea. This is the joyous, praiseworthy song in which God is praised after the Israelites leave Egypt, are led out of Egypt by Moses through God. And this is their first step on their way on dry land. So Moses and the Israelites sing the song to the Lord. They said, "I will sing to the Lord, for he has triumphed gloriously. Horse and driver he has hurled into the sea. The Lord is my strength and my might," or my song. "He has become my deliverance. This is my God, and I will honor God. The Lord, the warrior, Lord is his name." I'm going to read just one more. "Pharaoh's chariots and his army he cast into the sea," God cast into the sea, "and the pick of his officers are drowned in the sea of reeds." I'm actually just going to pause here because it's a lot at one time. I would like to hear from 1 or 2 of you all. What characteristics do you see, do you infer from this, even just these 4 verses? And if you have the source sheet in front of you, I believe it was sent out before the class. It's a little bit different than my version, but it has the material. what characteristics do you glean, do you see about God in these verses? What kind of God is God? And if you see different things, I want to know that too. So you can either raise your hand, and I think Ben will see more than I will. Okay, so I already see a raised hand, and I'm going to stop my share for the moment. Okay, I see Jay raising his hand. So Jay, will you unmute?
Go ahead, Jay.
Sure. I think you see the strength of God and the glory, the power.
Okay, great. Strength, glory, power. Other responses. How is God characterized? Thank you, Jay. How do you see God's character here in the story, in the song?
Robert, you can unmute if you like.
God is ruthless in his interest in defending and saving the Jews.
Okay, and saving the Israelites. Okay, great. So God, yes, I would agree with you. Based on verse 4, God is indeed ruthless. And I'm going to go ahead and share, it's a strong word, but I can't deny that that is not in this text. I'm going to share my screen again and show you just maybe one or two more verses and then talk more broadly. So I'm going to scroll down. And also, actually, two things. One is, I want to point out that in verse 2, for those of you that recognize Hebrew letters or speak or read Hebrew at any level, the root, the shorish in Hebrew, zayin mem resh, it is a musical root. It means song. And so interestingly, this verse is translated both as God is my strength. And notice also, this is not the typical word for God. And God is my song. So I want to point that out. And now we're going to scroll down. And also, actually, I want to point out one more thing, which is that most of the song is not in first person. Most of the song is in, there are quotes in first person where the enemy is speaking. That's what you're looking at in verse 9. But most of the song is spoken about God. However, in this verse here, there is I, the person that experienced the escape from Egypt, I am in the first person. So I'm talking about my personal experience. So I want to articulate, I've just pointed out that not only do we have the characteristics, perhaps of what Jay said, of what I believe Robert said, strength, glory, perhaps even ruthlessness, there may be something a little bit more subtle happening. Okay. So surprisingly, we continue, we're going to read verse 11, and we continue to see a very strong-armed, strong-willed, strong character, mighty God. So verse 11 is a famous verse. It is in our liturgy, it is in our prayers. I see some people recognize it. So I'm going to read it in Hebrew and English because you may recognize it by sound also. Mi chamocha ba'elim Adonai, who is like you, God, among those high above? Mi chamocha na'adar ba'kodesh, who is like you, adorned in holiness? Nora tehilot oseh fela, awesome in splendor, working wonders. God is well deserving of praises, or splendor, tehilot, you could say is praises, and God does create many wonders. I'm going to call our attention now to verse 13. In your chesed, your love, your kindness, you lead. The people you redeemed. In your strength, you guide them. You guided them in your fierce might, in your holy abode. And note that here in this verse also, bear with me for 1 second. The word oz, strength, is used, and that's the same word. Whoops, sorry about that. Hold on. That's the same word that is used above here. So those two verses are definitely connected. This verse where God is being spoken of from a first person experience, the idea of song is used, a different word for God, a shorter version of God's name is being used. And in this song also, surprisingly, the word chesed is used. For those of you who studied the book of Ruth with me, in the spring, we talked a lot about how the quality of chesed, acts of love and kindness, is expressed by many of the characters throughout the whole book. Chesed does seem to me to be a little bit out of place here, and that's what I want to explore with you. So I'm going to pause and stop the share for a moment and ask, what do you make? How do you understand these two, I'm presenting to you, these two different ways that God is portrayed in the Song of the Sea? On the one hand, I'll finish my thought and then I see someone has a raised hand. On the one hand, God is portrayed, as Jay and as Robert said earlier, in very strong ways. And I am suggesting that there may be something else going on here too, something a little more subtle. So what is your understanding of that? How do you interpret that? What message might you glean from that type of dual set, that those two sets of characteristics, strong on the one hand and something a little more nuanced or subtle on the other? So I see Rabbi Zev Chaim Fair raised his hand. I'll ask for your, please unmute, and I'll ask for your contribution.
Thank you. Reading this section in its context, we've just come through the 10 plagues, which were carefully structured from the gentlest step by step to the harshest. That's God's chesed. Let's see if we can persuade them gently. Oh, that didn't work. Let's do a little more force. A little more force, a little more force. And Pharaoh insists on refusing 5 times until finally God continues Pharaoh's refusal. So there's clearly the strength, but the strength is exerted in a chesedic manner.
That is very interesting. You're saying they're intertwined with one another.
Yes.
Chesed,
Yeah.
and it's beautiful. I'm picturing a spiral. That's very beautiful. Thank you. Okay, I saw a hand of someone.
Ronnie, I think.
Okay, great. Thank you, Ben. Okay, Ronnie.
Yeah, Roni.
Roni,
no,
thank
no
you.
biggie.
Thank you.
Thanks. Yes, so I see the opposite. I see compassion and all these troubles amassed, and then they were just wiped away.
Okay.
Pretty quickly.
Okay, so you see the compassion of God speaks to you most loudly in this text, even though it does seem sort of on the superficial level or just at first glance, it does seem like there's a lot of might and strength. You're saying what speaks most loudly to you is a sense of compassion for allowing the Israelites to become free, almost.
Right.
Did I articulate that? Well, okay.
Yes.
Okay, great. So we're actually I'm gonna jump back in here. I want to share with you at this point a commentary that's not too easy, but it's a commentary from Ramban Nachmanides, who lived in the, I want to say 12th century. I think he died in the late 12th century, so I'm just double checking my date, late 13th century, which I'll show you in just a moment. So we're going to read this commentary together and see what Ramban sees and wants us to see in the Song of the Sea. No pun intended. Okay, sharing again. Okay, so I added here in blue, I know it's a little bit small, but I put the verse that Ramban comments on just so it could be right in front of us. You can reference it above too. In this verse, God is described in each section. And then in this last part, the last part of the verse says, "This is my God." And Ramban is going to want us to think together, well, maybe not together, but he's going to want us to think, what is this? What does this refer to? Now, if everyone could mute, that would be great. Someone is typing and we can hear that. Okay, thank you. Thanks, Ben. So what I want to show you first, and I'm not going to go into a ton of detail about this. However, Ramban does reference these sfirot. So in Hasidic thought, well, in Jewish mysticism, in Kabbalah, there is this expression of God's qualities through different realms and different qualities that manifest themselves, that express themselves in our world. We're not going to spend a lot of time on this. This in itself, studying this is like a year-long course. People study Kabbalah for many years. It's fascinating and very spiritual, I find, and powerful. I just want you to see here that many of these sfirot, these spheres, have something to do, well, at least the top two for now, they have something to do with with wisdom and understanding, with something cognitive, and love, beauty, splendor. They're all generally a mix of both strong-willed and also something a little more gentle. So I'm just going to leave that for now, just so you can see it before we jump into Ramban. So Ramban says, perhaps this is my God in our verse refers to the 7 sfirot and wisdom. So he's talking about some specific sfirot in connection to wisdom, as it does in 3:15. We're not going to go back to that verse. We're going to stay on a bird's eye view of what Ramban is saying. According to the Mechilta, which is an earlier to Ramban commentary on the book of Exodus, the book of Shemot, this verse, our verse right here, seems to be, or is interpreted to mean, God behaved with me according to God's attribute of mercy, with my ancestors, with my fathers, according to his attribute of judgment. How do we know that? Is this just something Ramban is saying out of nowhere, out of being moved? Ramban says, well, take a look. This, I know it's small, I apologize. You can go back to the first one at the top of your source sheet. This word for God here is El, one of the names for God in the Hebrew Bible. And Ramban says, look, we know when El is used, El indicates the attribute of mercy, as we see in the section about Miriam, who got sara'at, often translated as leprosy, but not accurately. She got a skin disease after speaking Lashon Hara, after speaking badly about Moses. If you don't know that story, check it out. I'm summarizing it so briefly. I'm not doing it justice. In Numbers 12:13, part of the verse is El na refa na la. Moses prays to God on Miriam's behalf and says, God, pray, heal Miriam, please heal Miriam. So Miriam is healed and God is seen. We can certainly understand that in this particular verse, God is expressed in a merciful, compassionate way, as Roni said earlier. And so too in our verse, God must, if the same word is being used, God must be expressed in a compassionate way. And Ramban concludes, thus my God here indicates he will be El with me and that he will raise himself up to the level of mercy and be merciful in judgment. Ramban is truly, I think, picking up on, although God is certainly portrayed in very strong ways throughout this whole song, in this verse, and I would argue in the other verse toward the bottom of the song on your source sheet, where God is described with the word chesed, God is described in kinder terms. And I want to point out also, Yeshua, deliverance, is also something that is often hard for us to wrap our brains around. But on Saturday night, in the traditional Havdalah service, we focus on verses and concepts of being delivered by God, being saved, allowing God to bring us through in a coming week. And I will say here, please understand God as you understand God in this moment. We are asking for perhaps a higher power to help us bring ourselves through the week. Deliverance is a personal, in this case, it can be national. But what I'm suggesting to you here is that within the Song of the Sea, which focuses primarily on God's strength in a national deliverance, there are also subtle hints that God can also be extremely compassionate, full of chesed in a more personal way. And I want to show you one contemporary take on God in the Song of the Sea. The context of this commentary by Rabbi Shai held is a little bit different than our context. Rather than thinking about God's characteristics and different kinds, almost opposing ways that God is portrayed, Rabbi Shai held speaks of the balance between human action, human proactivity, and a more subtle presence of God. So I want to mention that context. Nevertheless, I think it's very appropriate for us today in our analysis. Rabbi Shai says, times have changed. In our own day, God does not split seas or accompany Israel in a cloud. God's presence is more subtle and elusive. God's involvement more mysterious. In the language of sages, we do not rely on miracles. Faith sometimes demands a willingness to let go. So I want to suggest to you that as we read this whole Exodus story, which for some people, I'll just include myself in that, the overpowering nature of God in these stories and the very strong-willed and perhaps even punishing God can sometimes feel not as comfortable as we'd like. And I want to suggest that we can always find in the Hebrew Bible something a little more subtle, a little more comforting, a little more supportive. From Havdalah on Saturday night, when we think about God supporting us in the coming week, to right here in the Song of the Sea, when we think about chesed, when we think about Yeshua, and we think about a compassionate, merciful God. And I'll end, I cannot resist with ending with my favorite verse, and then I am eager to hear your thoughts about all of this. In the book of Kings, God is having a conversation with Elijah. Elijah is known as a very strong, he's often called a radical monotheist. He takes very strong actions against people that he does not see as believing and behaving in a way that expresses allegiance to the one Israelite God. In a scene between God and Elijah, God shows Elijah winds, an earthquake, a splitting mountains and shattering rocks. And then God says in the end of all that, after the earthquake, after the fire, God was not in any of those things. Instead, what is God? God tells Elijah, a kol dmama daka. 2 translations here, 3 actually. A still small voice, a soft murmuring sound. So whenever we encounter God in the whole Torah and the whole Hebrew Bible, I would suggest that each of us try and always stay in touch with the times that God is portrayed as extremely strong, as overpowering, perhaps even as punishing. Let's also stay in touch with the fact that we can have a relationship with a different kind of power, a still small voice, a power of chesed, a power of compassion. So I wish you all those things in your lives, compassion, chesed, and still small voices. And I am eager to hear your thoughts, not only on this section of the Torah portion, but anything connected to the ways in which God is portrayed. So I will stop my share and take 3 questions, and we'll stay on until, I see Julie. Hi, Julie. We'll stay on until about 11:10. And if people need to leave earlier, of course, that's totally fine. So your thoughts, reactions, reflections, clarifications, questions.
Sarah? Yeah, so it seems interesting to me that, this is such an important piece, and we only we only sing just a little bit of it during Pasukei Zimra, right? We only sing just a few like first lines and then the end, and there's a whole rest of it, right? And I don't know, it's just interesting how like we only sing a little bit of it, and we're talking, it's such an important, you know, part of this story, and then all this, oh yeah, we're all just gonna, you know, kind of gloss over it and only sing a little bit. That's the first comment. The second one is that if anyone knows another melody to like, especially that little part, I mean, the one we do is fine, but it's like, it's boring. I'm kind of tired of it. If anyone knows any others, I would love to hear them and where I can find them. Thanks.
Sarah, I'll make a suggestion for you. Off the top of my head, there's, do you know the Hadar website, hadar.org? So they have a few different tunes for each tefillah, for each prayer. So maybe check that out. And also sometimes when I'm looking for tunes or I'm teaching them, I just go to YouTube and I just type in the prayer, and sometimes I find something good. Sometimes I find things not so good, but you could try that. And in response to thank you for both comments and questions. In response to what you said earlier, I would suggest that in line with my suggestion that God's just overpowering strength is also paired with God's compassion, even in the song. One might interpret the reason for reading just part of the song is that maybe it's an overpowering experience to read about that level of God's power every single morning. Maybe we titrate a little bit in order to get in touch with God's more compassionate side. Thank you, Sarah. Other, and I'm going to invite voices that we haven't heard yet into our Zoom room. So if you haven't yet shared but wanted to, I invite your reflections.
Yeah, thank you. Two things. In response to the melody, Shira Ladonai ki gapoga susfroforama bayam, the melody of Tzena Tzena, which flows right through it. Also, I'd like to say, with all due respect, I'm going to reverse Rabbi Held's perception and suggest that God is just as active and just as clearly active. We have lost our sensitivity to noticing.
Okay, I hear you. Thank you for bringing in a different perspective. Other perspectives, thoughts, clarifications on this duality that I've presented today? Oh, I see Nels Katzman, so I'll ask Nels to unmute. Hi, Nels.
Hi. I'm just thrilled at the various aspects of God, the various names, the various composition that we can assign to God, and that for every yin there's a yang. So nothing is firm, nothing is the only way, and that's the beauty of Judaism. I just love it.
Thank you. I love it too. Okay, I see a couple of raised hands. I can't totally tell. Oh, there we go.
Yes, so Nina, go ahead.
Okay. I find it easy to embrace, the duality of God or the sort of multiple personalities. I think the greater struggle for me is, this is going to sound weird, but where and when does God get credit versus us? And I think I've come down on not dwelling on that too much and instead trying to focus more on whether I believe in God at any moment or not, my behavior is a manifestation of either something good or not good in the world. And that's kind of how I resolve that. So, and I don't always resolve it consistently. It's not like, every day I feel the same way about it. But I think it's to the earlier comment about we sort of lost our ability. I think there is a lot of noise in the world, which makes it harder for us to think about where is God in the midst of all that. So I choose instead to look at the choices we make, which is, I think, ultimately what the Hebrew Bible says to us. You know, people make choices. I'm sorry, I have dogs, and those choices have consequences for good or for ill. And that's my lesson. So I'll mute myself.
Okay. Nina, thank you. I really hear you about, you know, trying to at first initially focus on the where and when and trying to understand everything that's up above or, you know, beyond us, and then taking a moment to take a step back and say, wait a second, it's really about what is my impact here on others. And I really identify with that, and I appreciate your bringing that into the conversation.
Susan and Doug, did you have a question or comment?
Okay. I'm sorry, but I was quite confused by your presentation. I'm trying to understand, why is there a problem with God having these two different aspects of being all powerful and being all merciful? I don't understand where the problem is with that.
Yeah, I thank you for sharing your question and confusion. Yeah, I'm actually not suggesting there's a problem. I'm actually suggesting that there's a rich tapestry of portrayals and expressions of God, and sometimes one may seem like the only one that's there, but if we look a little closely and a little closer than meets the eye, we actually get to see multiple expressions of God. So I would say when you're asking like, well, what's the challenge in the text? So I would suggest the challenge is, oh, is God only this terribly overpowering? And I think as Robert said earlier, almost ruthless? Like, is that all that there is? And in fact, when you look a little bit more closely at the Song of the Sea, there are verses that even say that God is full of chesed, God is full of love and kindness right here in this very expression of God's strength. And as I pointed out with the verse about Elijah, God can also be seen as a still small voice. So not a problem at all, just a rich tapestry that I'd encourage us all to embrace when we think about God. How much does that help you grasp the ideas we explored together, and are you still confused?
No, that's how I see it, is that God has both, and I'm not dissuaded from either side by reading the whole song. I don't see one as dominating over the other, and so that's where I land on this situation. God has these different attributes related to people who believe and to people who don't believe.
Sure. Thank you for especially that last insight. So we'll take one more, I think, and then we'll wrap up for this morning.
Would anyone else like to ask a question or make a comment? I'll see if trying to see if there's any waving hands. If you can't find the raise hand button. Someone commented in the chat, Abby, that the Escher painting in the background, which I don't see, but they said it was a good visual parallel.
Oh, it's not Escher.
Oh, okay. I was missing it. What is it?
It's actually, it's something that I bought in Krakow, I believe, in Krakow, Poland, and it starts off with white triangles on a black background, and then they sort of transition into Jewish stars. There's like one Magen David and then another. So it's like these building blocks, and then actually the Jewish stars transform into birds. And it's really, I found it extremely powerful. I think it was there was a Krakow, there was a Jewish history museum in Krakow that I visited. And I loved the idea of different kinds of building blocks and this transformation from a Jewish symbol into a free bird. It just, yeah, we could take a whole other session to talk about that symbolism. So yeah, so thank you for pointing that out, Freya or Freya. I don't know if I pronounce that correctly. Okay, so we are going to wrap up. Thank you, everyone, for joining and for sharing your thoughts. Speaking of rich tapestries, your your insights and your questions certainly make this time together in the exploring the Torah portion much more meaningful than if it were just my own thoughts. So thank you for sharing and for being here, and Shabbat Shalom. Stay warm if you're in a cold place, and hope to see you all again.